Who are dialing in from home, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's come out to be with us physically this evening. We're going to be hearing from the Reverend Kate Gray in a little while. I'll introduce her a bit more fully when we come to that point in the programme. But otherwise we're going to start, and we're going to be looking at climate activism. A focus on what we might do as individuals or what we might support other individuals in doing, and wrestling with some of the issues of what is appropriate in our climate activism. But we're going to start off with a short act of devotional worship. I've taken it from this book, which is called TwM, which is kind of the manual for Christian climate action, which is the group that Kate will be is a member of, and I'm loosely affiliated with. I don't think I'm closely enough affiliated to call myself a member, but I certainly follow what they're doing. So it's a... Is this working, Ian, or does it need to be turned on? That's better. Okay. So starting off, it's called A Litany for the Earth, and it's been written by a woman called Fran Pratt, and it starts off with a quotation from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him, for he laid the earth's foundation on the seas and built it on the ocean depths. Who may climb the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? Only those whose hands and hearts are pure, who do not worship idols and never tell lies. They will receive the Lord's blessing and have a right relationship with God their Saviour. Such people may seek you and worship you in your presence, O God of Jacob. And a prayer which we'll read responsively, if you could read along in the bold print. God, we lament of the destruction that has been done, that we have permitted to be done, by our silence and inaction, and by our direct action, to the earth, your creation. Forgive us, Lord. Even now we realize that our home is suffering. Its inhabitants are suffering from a lack of clean air and water, lack of life-giving nourishment, lack of a safe habitat. Help us to become aware of the needs of humanity, of the needs of generations to come, needs of soil and creatures. We acknowledge that we have a chance to choose peace over profit, to choose activity over complacency, to choose a greater good over today's convenience. Arouse in us a new compassion, new willingness to change, a new excitement to foster community in the abundance of your kingdom, a new zeal for establishing the peace and justice of God, a new understanding of the connectedness of all things, a new appreciation of the gift of the earth. Amen. And as we're thinking about personal responses this week, we're now going to sing I, the Lord of Sea and Sky.
I will make
Thank you. So we now come to Kate. Kate is the minister in the United Reformed Church. She's coordinator of the Dandelion community, where you've been for several years. Yep. She's recently dropped down her hours to enable her to start a PhD studentship, which is at Coventry University. And she's, for a number of years, been involved in activism around the climate. And she's going to talk to us now and lead us in our discussion. So, Kate.
Okay, great. Let's start. Grand. Hello there. Oh, good, great. So it's lovely to be your next door neighbour in Wythenshawe and then pop up the road. That feels really lovely. So thanks for your warm welcome, Richard, and the techie support, which no doubt I'm completely reliant on this evening. And hello to whoever it is that might be tuning in from various other lands and places online. That's great too. I am a member of Christian Climate Action, and this is the logo, the symbol that goes with Christian Climate Action. And it's good to share that from the outset. So some of us speak about Christian Climate Action as the Christians that are connected with Extinction Rebellion. But some of us, like in Flavours of Christianity, are not happy with that description. So we are an autonomous group that acts also in connection with Extinction Rebellion. So I think it's great for you to see and hear a little bit this evening about, I'm going to show you a little bit about my story and a little bit about some of the Christians in Christian Climate Action as one of the responses to the climate emergency, to the climate context in which we're in. So you can see here from the two pictures on the right-hand side a number of different things. I'm going to ask you to speak to me because I'm a bit interactive. I know you're going to speak to each other later. But just tell me, initially, what do you see in those pictures? You know, it can be really obvious, that's fine. But, Belish speaking. Nice. Thank you, Jeff. A boat, yeah. A boat in the middle of London. Yeah, that's right. Come to press the lights to go across. Lovely. Yeah. Anything else that you can see? It is, yes. It's a little tiny snapshot of a bit of one of the demos. And this is one of my colleagues here lying down. This is, I think, Sue Parfet. And we'll hear a bit from her in a few minutes. She's quite well known internally to us in Christian Climate Action. And she has her right arm inside a tube, plastic tube. So it's connected to, I know not where. It goes off the photograph. And it looks quite messy, actually, this bottom photograph. It's quite a messy photo. There's lots of people, there are some buildings, there are just on the top right-hand side, that's the bottom of a pink boat. So boats have featured quite highly in Extinction Rebellion's presence in London and in other parts of the world. And so the boat in the top and the boat in the bottom, they're different boats. One of those boats made it up to Deansgate in the city centre of Manchester a couple of years ago. And the police and the general public were very helpful. There was a whole variety of food and drink served. And there was a kind of pop-up picnic and lots of different workshops around climate activism. And the Christians from around Greater Manchester went along to that and shared in that with prayer, with communion, and with vigil, which is sometimes one of the ways in which we explore protest together.
And Kate, I'm the voice of the 15 people who are joining us online. And one comment is they're seeing things displaced or things out of their expected place.
Yes, definitely. We don't expect to find a plastic tube on the end of an arm, and we don't expect to find two boats normally in very central London, unless they're heading to the south coast perhaps or somewhere. So I'm going to explore this question with you this evening. In some evangelical churches that are part of my story, in my background, in those charismatic churches, we would often explore the question, what would Jesus do? So I'm just putting a little spin on that. What would Jesus do in this climate emergency? And that really is for us to explore together. Just the picture at the top there, you can see it's a wide variety of people placed just handily outside some of the seats of democracy, we hope, at the Houses of Parliament there. And a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, we're all in the before and after now, aren't we, of that? So pre-pandemic, Extinction Rebellion and a whole variety of other partners had some rebellions, they were called, internally and sometimes publicly, some rebellions, where lots and lots of people went to London and other parts of the country and did a variety of different things, some of which made it onto the news. Some were very, very controversial, some less so. I wonder, would Jesus do any of these things in a climate emergency or not? Could we show the first little tiny film? There's a snippet, and it's about a minute, and it's of Sue Parfet.
I'm sure I will shock by saying what I'm going to say, but I feel much more securely called by God to this than I did to the priesthood. I feel I'm in the right place now, yes. And I'm sure going to prison, I'll find some things unbearable and some things I never thought about, So, but they will be bearable, God will be there.
This is the little snippet, like the teaser, to, if you want to, go online at Empathy Media, to watch a bit more about Sue's testimony, Sue's story of faith, and how she has become more fully involved with non-violent direct action in recent years, although it's been part of her story for many years. As an Anglican priest, she speaks very clearly and openly about the ways in which she interprets the Bible and the Jesus that she follows, and how those things marry together with her faith, her theology, and her walk. So I thought it might be helpful for you to know a little bit more about my own story. My mum is a Christian and my dad is not a Christian. And in the household that I was brought up in, we often went up the road to the castle through the woodland and the parks. I was brought up in North Wales. I've got no Welsh lilt left whatsoever, I think, in my voice now. I'm very much kind of Mancunian and of the north. But it was really important for me in my childhood to be able to be free in the natural world around me. Often we would be at the beach or in the woodland or walk the little lanes near our home. I come from a working class family, and we came from a very ordinary area. We lived on a main road, and I went to the local primary school, and I hadn't heard anything about climate emergency until I heard a bit about greenhouse gases. And I was a teenager then. And I heard about the Earth's atmosphere, and there were pictures in my science classes of the Earth and then of layers outside the Earth that got warmer and warmer and warmer. And it did not ever occur to me to be involved personally in addressing something to do with that. I was always brought up in the church, and in my Sunday school, in my youth club, it wasn't necessarily there wasn't necessarily a direct translation in how we would respond then to caring for the earth, because the situation as it was presented to me was not then as dire as we find ourselves in now. Some time later, I travelled to other parts of the world and was able to share with people and learn from them, particularly in Oceania, in Fiji and Samoa and Tonga, where I spent a year as part of my master's when I was training to be a minister. So as part of the World Church programme in the United Reformed Church, we were able to go and be and live and learn alongside other people in other contexts. And there, I heard and saw from Greenpeace in Fiji what was happening with the mangroves and what was happening with the coral reefs. And this was about 20 years ago. And there already things had begun to be very, very challenging in that context. And I wondered, how does this connect to me? And that was really the beginning of what I call my wakey up journey. It's one of these quotes. I don't think information is necessarily helpful. I don't stand here as somebody who's going to throw lots of scientific facts at you about the Earth warming up and about carbon emissions, etc. But I found this particularly helpful. I wonder, just even the first line was one of the things that I connected with. I wonder if you think climate change is the defining issue of our time. I wonder, as we sung in that song, if God gives us a word, if God gives us each a word, either individually or collectively, what word is God speaking to us about in these times? Climate change is moving faster than we are. If we don't change course then, by 2020, here we are in 22, then there are consequences that are disastrous for us. I don't think Antonio is somebody who is especially reactionary or a great lefty. Although in my family we are kind of left-wing in our ideas, it's hard, I think, it's been hard to put those things always into practice in my own life and know what that looks like. Especially I found that most challenging in the church, where we appear to be often slower than I would love us to be, and a lot of the time, in my experience, more measured and more risk-averse than I think Jesus could hope for. the last couple of years before pandemic, somebody who some people recognise as the Archbishop, Rowan Williams, or now former Archbishop, said these things and quite often came to pray alongside the Christians in London in Extinction Rebellion in the several protests in the spring and in the October, in the spring and in the autumn. The nature of changes in climate and environment, that we're living with threatening not only the well-being but also the being of our species on this planet in the long term and the medium term. They threaten some of the most vulnerable populations on Earth. Those vulnerable populations include people, but they also, of course, include our other brothers and sisters near and far, our neighbours in plant life and other creatures. And my question with all of the things is, so what? What difference does this make to us? And I hope it makes a great deal of difference. But it's hard. It's my understanding that I think we're in a time where the time is running out. This timer, this sand timer. And this feels like a really difficult way to encourage each other then, to take time to reflect and to respond carefully with attention to detail. It feels like there is pressure on us by external forces, but also those external forces that we create, where the time is slipping away, and whether we have 2, 3, 6 years, depending on how conservative or speedily we estimate from the scientific community that we have to be able to mitigate some of the climate emergency circumstances. These things are really challenging to me, and I wanted to share a little bit with you. I'm a mum of 2 children. My son is 12 and my daughter is 7. And the first protest that we went to, they drew little pictures on cardboard with lots and lots of other families and children and young people, and off we went to outside Manchester Library. That's mostly where lots of kind of protests or marches start, and there's various speakers. That's the equivalent of Speaker's Corner really in Manchester. And off we went. And there were playful things, there were workshops, there was dancing and singing. And so it felt like a kind of carnival atmosphere, a party atmosphere, rather than one that had fear or shame or guilt tripping involved. These seem to me to be challenging motivators to hold together. We want to celebrate the goodness of God's creation, and we know that that's so precious to us, and yet time is running out. There are some things that relate to circumstances of creating change. There's plenty of evidence around how we arrive at a tipping point where the government, which has made a declaration of climate emergency and made some inroads towards changes towards energy policy last year, particularly in relation to declarations surrounding COP26 in Scotland, when the world's eyes were upon us, that seem to be shifting somewhat now in the context of the war in relation to Ukraine and Russia, and how we respond to the transition of, do we need fossil fuels? Where and who can we get them from if we do? Do we need to have some of our own licenses for oil and gas, or not? And how quickly is it possible to turn some of those things around? So this slide reflects something about the tipping point in any population, and that is somewhere around 3 to 3.5% of a whole population. If everybody is behind, or if the majority, around 50 to 55%, are behind that, making a change in policy translated into practice, then might a small number of people encourage that tipping point to happen more quickly? And so the question comes about non-violent direct action. I became involved in non-violent direct action because I did not believe the things that were happening in the timescale that was needed to respond. So when I joined Christian Climate Action, I knew that there were going to be some questions for me about how I would respond. Would I, and was it appropriate ever to, for example, follow Jesus, which would involve not keeping a law? This was one of the questions. What if that was the decision I shared in my family and in our local church in Wythenshawe with the elders and the church members? What might it mean for me as a church leader, as a minister, if I chose to go to something and then broke a particular law? What might that look like, and what would the consequences be potentially for me? And so in our local church, we began the journey of exploring those things together with the elders and the members, Sunday by Sunday, over a period of months, as Extinction Rebellion, alongside, planned to block some roads in the knowledge that to force an issue about the government declaring a climate emergency. This is an image of Jesus. I don't really like this painting. It really looks strange to me. It kind of feels like a very old-fashioned painting, one that is not necessarily beautiful or attractive to me. There you go. You can have your own emotional response to it. And it also looks to me that the figure in the middle, in pink and green, who apparently is painted as Jesus, is to be interpreted by us as Jesus. It looked to me on first viewing like Jesus was holding a string of pearls, that he's holding ropes, whips. So this is Jesus losing his rag in the temple. The turning over of the tables. You've turned my house into a den of a total mess. And my interpretation of this painting is the challenge. Look who are the onlookers. There are some women and children there. There in the bottom left, there are some, well, maybe they're turtle doves. There are some sacrificial animals there. And the challenge, and can you see them in the top right there? Some baskets on the heads of women. So it's an interesting mix. It's of its time. And I wonder, do you have particular responses to this painting? It could be said to be not necessarily non-violent direct action. That's in my reading of it, which is really interesting. This was chosen deliberately for this presentation. And the lambs, can you see right next to Jesus, just here? So this interesting combination of, is this an image that we could use to explore for ourselves of a Jesus involved in direct action? Not necessarily only the painting, but we can think of Jesus turning over the table in the temples. And I wonder how comfortable you feel about a Jesus who does these kinds of things. It's frequently the kind of Jesus that Christians from Christian climate action refer to. And in my experience, the images that I have seen of Jesus haven't often looked like this. They actually have been much more varied in the last 10 years than they ever have been in the whole of the rest of my life. But I wonder for you about your images of Jesus. So some thoughts on what non-violent civil resistance is, or non-violent direct action, on the left-hand side. A powerful way for people to non-violently demand rights, freedom and justice. When people come together, people wage non-violent civil resistance, they use a variety of different tactics. There are 2 books on the back there that have got hundreds of different kinds of approaches and strategies and tactics. Boycotts. Some of you will have boycotted things from different parts of the world, perhaps in your lifetime. Some of you will have been proactive. I think I saw lots of fair trade stickers around this building. So you have, I'm sure, in your own experiences, a whole range of things that you have chosen to do or not do with your money, and perhaps with your pensions, or perhaps with the kinds of educational approaches that you have taken and shared in your families, with the kind of paper that you read, the kind of things that you listen to. So we're informed by the kinds of practices of non-violent direct action in Christian climate action. And those are often to push what we're most comfortable with. And that's quite difficult. You know, I feel uncomfortable speaking, actually just speaking about that isn't something that rests easy with me as a person. I think I'm happy to be in ideas and in my intellect countercultural. And in my practice, it's really hard. I find that hard to put into practice. So I need encouragement from Christians, particularly, who want to explore that very seriously as a possibility. And Christians who have been involved in Christian climate activism before have taken seriously considering what the word disruption is about in practice. How does my being a disciple of Jesus affect my non-violent action? How is it that I live? You know, from day to day, the kinds of conversations that I have, the kind of body language, the kinds of ways that I go about my everyday life, what I do with my time, energy, money, attention, etc. And then, you know, I've always been somebody, for example, who's written to my MP, my poor MP, who has to hear about all sorts of different things from us all as Christians. We're often, I think, I don't imagine this church is much different, or you from your respective churches. I have found that our MP, Mike Kane, who's often been very, very supportive, helped set up Church Action on Poverty more than 2 decades ago. He's very, very proactive, but he also is an MP that includes Manchester Airport. So asking him what he thinks and feels in relation to climate emergency is really messy. It's really hard for him. He's also a practicing Roman Catholic. So this kind of thing, these things are not straightforward. So there's a withholding of judgment that's needed, and an openness in the explorations together, I think, that is something that I want to encourage us to do. For some Christians, when you see kind of different images of Christians involved with direct action, and this in the middle here in the green, this is Ruth Jarman. So she has been working for about 35 or 40 years in the environmental movement, as she would call it. She's helped set up Operation Noah. I don't know if some of you have heard of that Christian charity. She's very strongly been connected with Eco Church and with Bright Now, which is about divesting from fossil fuels in a range of different ways, collectively and individually as households and churches. And she works now for Green Christian part-time. And she's been arrested about 15 or 20 times in the last 3.5 years. Just that time. It's concentrated the mind for her. She's married, she's got some children, and she has risked arrest, and she's also risked, more recently with some of the actions, going to prison, and she's risked very long prison sentences. And having to face that and hearing from her about that has been really challenging to me as a church leader.
I was in Hendon Magistrates Court being tried for Public Order Section 14. For 2 decades I have been trying everything else, but it's the protesting on the streets that actually has made a difference. Thank you so much. We have to balance the just small amount of disruption now with the disruption that will be caused if we allow climate change to go past that tipping point to a cascade of feedback effects, which will mean, famine, global famine, not just in the global south where it is happening already.
I was in court with Ruth today, and I have to say that it was one of the most moving experiences I've had in a long time, when she reminded the court that everybody needed to bring their conscience to work. The impact on everybody in that courtroom was so profound.
I was very sorry that people were disrupted, had their lives disrupted, especially this person that couldn't get to her doctor's appointment. But there's something like 1,000 people a day, mostly children, are dying now because of climate change. We are, at the moment in this country, we don't really notice that. It's something out there. But in the future, if we allow the tipping points to be passed, it'll happen here too. We will have huge famine and civilization breakdown, societal breakdown. That will be a rather larger disruption to the people of London.
We, in Extinction Rebellion, I think, are really acting for other people. I think that's so fundamental that when that is begun to be appreciated, that it's not our interests in protest, but it's everybody's interests, that balance, I think, will change. And the prosecutor, I think, was so shaken by the way that Ruth had put her case that he asked what was really an extraordinary statement. He asked her a question that said, do you think that this is a court of morality? I don't think I've ever heard anybody ask a question like that in a court of law. And she simply said yes, because that's what it needs to do. We need to bring our consciences into this. That's the truth, isn't it? We were here to tell the truth. And she did. And I think the judge heard that. I think he was very affected by that.
So our government is breaking its own laws on climate as well as failing in its primary duty to protect the lives of its citizens. And that's why I started getting involved with the peaceful non-violent civil disobedience. The ordinary means of shifting society have run out of time. Part of who I am is my need to tell the truth. This is an important part of the Christian tradition. The Bible is full of prophets preaching uncomfortable truths to their generation. And Jesus speaking the truth led to his crucifixion. And telling the truth, I think, is the key response to the climate emergency we're in. And the problem is that politicians, the media, businesses, even NGOs have actually been lying to themselves and to us about quite how urgent the crisis is. And I think only if people completely understand, really understand the absolute emergency we're in, only then will they be willing to call for and make the economic and societal transformations that are required. For 2 decades, my words were ignored. 2 weeks on the streets of London was not ignored. Opinion polls showed concern for the environment at the highest level on record, and the Shadow Chancellor stated that the Extinction Rebellion led directly to the Parliament's declaration of the climate and environment emergency. I believe we are called to be faithful and not successful. Should the rebellion not work and we fail to stop climate, ecological and civilization meltdown, I still believe that peacefully standing against the criminal negligence of our government is still the best moral and truthful choice in this time of extinction.
There's lots of food for thought. No, I've seen that and had conversations with Ruth a few times in the last few months. As soon as a small group of people from Christian Climate Action began to take these kinds of actions, more Christians joined them because of the consequences of what happened to those Christians in that first wave. And so the second wave of Christians came out, and then the third wave of Christians, and the fourth and the fifth. And the groups began from, I think, less than 10 people. I think there were 8 or 9 people. And now there are several hundred Christians as part of Christian Climate Action who are able to be present and in person, and who will go to join in Holy Week. How fitting, I think, in Holy Week. And so Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Deathly Saturday, and then the Sunday where possibilities are open. Christians will put our bodies in places where the law doesn't easily receive us or want us to be. And those acts of disruption are done with love and kindness and respect, as much as we're able to communicate. But also, they cause trouble. They cause a great deal of unrest. They cause lots of lively public discussion. And so these are some of the colleagues that have been involved in that. My images in my head of protesters, well, there are all sorts of people now. I don't have any particular stereotype, although I think the stereotypes are still there. Tree-hugging, crusties, lefties, very definitely Guardian readers. And also people who have experience of doing that. So I met some people who had been at other kinds of ways, other places like Aldermaston and Greenham, and inspired by Swampy and the Newbury bypass and all kinds of So it brings out all sorts of different people who might be really well used to protesting. But what I like much more is people who've never been involved before, people who are as scared as I am, people who are really unsure about what this is going to mean for them in their families and in their churches. So in the church that I'm part of, in the United Reformed Church, our safeguarding officer has had to make a risk assessment of me because I was arrested and convicted because I sat down in the front of the Houses of Parliament. I did that with about 400-500 other people also. I was not a lone solo protester. But when that went to court in London, that meant it came up on my DBS. And so the safeguarding officer, she's not mine, but the safeguarding officer needed to call me. And our regional church leader also needed to have a conversation with me. And both of them have said to me not to be involved in something that will result in this again. So that is part of the consequences for you to also think about who are your church leaders. What do you think about them being involved in this? And if they are, and there are consequences, how and in what ways are you able to reach out towards them? For example, if I encourage you to be involved in non-violent direct action, which I am just exactly doing, I face disciplinary action by the United Reformed Church for putting the reputation of the church at risk. So I would like you to have a wonder about that for yourselves in your denomination, in your churches. I wonder if the reputation of the church is really at stake if I'm arrested and convicted, or if we don't get involved in this way, the reputation of the church is severely affected in quite a different way. So I knew that all sorts of different people would be involved. There you go, there's some people who are recognised as bishops as well as archbishops. There's a couple of them there alongside. These are various kinds of non-violent direct action that took place. So you can see, being on top of a lorry, that's one. Might you be comfortable and willing to do that? Or send somebody else to do that who was willing and comfortable from your church, your congregation? I don't know. Would you, that's the bottom left, and then at the top in the middle, people sat inside a train station praying together and sharing communion and breaking bread. That kind of seems quite tame. There aren't many police around that. But it depends where you have communion. Because if you go and choose to have communion on the M25, that's one place, and that will cause you to be on the front of a newspaper and definitely in court within a very short space of some months. But on the right-hand side, you might go, for example, to a branch of a local bank that has lots of investments in fossil fuels. Barclays, for example, I would highly recommend, you could visit them respectfully, kindly. We do it with real love. We are Christians. We are not here to deliberately do anything that will hurt people. But there is something there about disruption and offence that the gospel is, and that Jesus leads us to, which I think is significant to consider. And on the right-hand side at the bottom, this is pretend blood that's been poured out in front of a government building. Now, you can't see the government buildings on the right-hand side there. And sometimes those things don't go very well. They're not entirely straightforward. Sometimes they're often, we were saying, meticulously planned. But then when they make it onto the front of, a newspaper, or somebody films them with their mobile phone just next to them, then often they see that a fire engine that has pretend blood in instead of water goes in front of the particular kinds of government departments and then goes a bit berserk. I don't know if you saw that on the news a couple of years ago, but... So that is our whistle-stop tour of exploration and bit of storytelling, bit of reflection, wondering together. So, here are some questions for you to ponder. Your bit now. Pick one or two and have a ponder. I'd say maybe we could be in two groups. Yeah, a couple of groups. Give chance so that everybody in your group first can say what they think and feel in relation to any of that stuff that just went on, the things that you've heard and listened to, because that might be the first time you've heard some of those things. And it's a lot, lots of images and lots of different thoughts around that. And then if you feel led, ask the Holy Spirit, which question shall I ponder? And if you're not sure, choose the question that makes you feel most uncomfortable. Because that's likely to be where the Holy Spirit is unearthing things in your own heart from my own experience. Go.
And we're going to have one or two breakout groups, Ian? It's probably going to be one, so as we've done in the past, if you don't want to be involved in the breakout group, just sign off now and you won't be allocated. But we will be having a little bit of feedback at about 10 to 9 or something like that. Yeah, so if you want to log in, then you could hear that.
And if there's somebody in your groups who wants to jot or feedback, if that feels too schooly, just skip that. But, we want to share because I'd love to hear your thoughts and we'd like to hear different groups, so that'd be great.
So those people online, we're glad to welcome you back. And we'll try and drag Kate away from her little breakout group. Kate, I think we're going to have to drag you away.
Thank you.
And can we give you a couple of comments from the breakout rooms?
Sure, yes,
Excellent.
Please.
Just to remind you that we're all here still. One comment around question 2. So do you see civil resistance in the Bible? Elijah on Mount Carmel, though he did not fare very well afterwards. Paul arrested and rearrested for refusing to stop preaching Jesus, as was Peter. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll turn you up.
Would add to that is Jesus' repeated breaking of the Sabbath rules, clear law breaking. In the entrance into Jerusalem as a protest, very similar to some of the marches we see today.
Yeah. It's a bit about the laws of table fellowship. Jesus mixed with not the great and the good. So the table fellowship at the time, Jesus didn't court the company of the people that he, could have really done. He could have done well for himself if he'd tried harder. But instead, he chose to eat with waifs, strays, debt collectors of all kinds. And he broke a lot of popularity laws then, really, as well.
and associated with lepers who were kept in a particular place outside the city because it was unsafe to bring them inside.
Yeah, various kinds of unclean people, Gentiles included. So that would be everybody not Jewish. So that includes all of us. We get included in that, literally.
Another comment as well for you. So slightly separate from questions, but listening to this evening prompts me to think that the list given by St Paul in Ephesians 4 verse 11, which for those of you that's not off the top of your head, is so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service. But the point is that that list could be expanded to other roles, recontextualised, to include activists, lawyers skilled in the issues, supporters caring for families if an arrest occurs, Gandhi's method of non-violent demonstration where he arranged for journalists to be present and to document it, and his highly organised methodology still speaks to us today.
So a variety of different kinds of support networks, even if we keep the original traditional list from Ephesians and interpret that in other ways. Yeah, the people who are already in those kinds of structures or roles. There isn't, Paul's quite an advocate of keeping the law. He was quite for the law. If you hear and listen to lots of Paul's little books and letters, and yet I am writing to you from prison again, is what he often says. So this is interesting. This is, I think it really causes challenge to us, about where we are and how we focus, which isn't necessarily to break or not to break the law. That is not the question. But about who has our attention. What do we give our heart to? Who is it who has the call on our life? We talked in our group a little bit about call and the work of prayer and the Holy Spirit in this. To guide and lead us. Not we're doing it because we're reactionaries or revolutionaries. We're doing it because Jesus is calling us, and he is a particular kind of teacher and rabbi, and we are to be his disciples, and it's in that spirit of discipline. He is our teacher, we are the learners. So those biblical examples of, and Sue Parfet, the first little clip that we saw of the Anglican priest, she said, her view is, the early church, the Christians had a revolving door. They went out and they preached the gospel. They were arrested and they were sent to prison. They went out and they preached the gospel, then they were sent to prison. They went out and they preached the... Why don't we have that? What is the matter with us? We are the same as them. They are the same as us. They were scared, just the same. They had people and pressures on them. They had incomes. They had, jobs to lose. We are not different from each other. Let's not separate us. Oh, they were these wondrous... No, they were as ordinary as we are. And they're still the same kinds of, that commonality with those biblical examples.
I think the other thing is that it's clear that at times Paul uses the arrest to give himself a platform to make his case. His final arrest, he engineers to be taken to Rome so that he can present his case to the authorities there. He's using arrest as a way of promoting the gospel.
Yeah, and it's been very interesting to hear of brothers and sisters. I didn't go to court to give my statement, but brothers and sisters in Extinction Rebellion and in Christian Climate Action did and have. We saw Ruth, didn't we, and heard a bit of her reading out her statement. Part of the purpose is to do that. Just as our online person has shared, to be inspired by the strategic and tactical caring approaches of non-violence that inspired Gandhi and Martin Luther King and rafts and swathes of people all around the world since, I would say, since before Jesus. And the combination of the practice of non-violence and the consequences of that, and the openness and transparency. Christians in Christian Climate Action pray, share communion, baptism, and also are in obedience to Christ. And the consequence of that is they break the law. The aim isn't to break the law. The aim is to cause disruption, to gain attention and public friction. It's a creative example of something. It causes antagonism. It's really tricky and complex, especially when we're schooled in politeness and good order and our special ways of class that keep us in those things. So I do think disruption does cause that public debate. And we talked about in our group a bit about bringing people with us, having people on side or not. And we don't need everybody to be on side. The general public already has an enormous concern about this. And, more than 80% of young people know this climate emergency in their future. It's seriously affecting their mental health and well-being. They are longing for people to join them. They don't want, adults to leave them to it. They don't want children to have to pick this up and campaign about this, in decades to come. They want us to take it so seriously that we're willing to cause disruptive action, to press the issue in a timely manner with care and respect and so much love for our neighbours because we want us to survive. It's as critical as that. And it's not out of judgment, it's out of love for our neighbour, that combination of things. You had quite some lively discussions in your group. Do you want to share a little about any of these? I'm not sure we did, said Jeff.
I suspect the trouble is we travelled too much ground for there to be something specific to come out.
That's okay. Don't have to.
Of how do you protest and disrupt and not turn off the very people who are being disadvantaged. It is a very difficult one. I did say I couldn't imagine how anybody noticed that there was a backlog on the M25, given the normal circumstances. It must have been some disruption.
There was a great deal of disruption and quite a number of very angry people, who really, really kicked and kicked and kicked a number of people and dragged them about on the road. What might you do if you had somewhere to be and somebody was right in front of you? But imagine, if that was your child sat in the road, because that's the equivalent is. That's as close to each other as we ought to be. You are my brothers and sisters, even though I don't agree with lives or practices or beliefs or politics. None of those things really are the first thing. Love for us, if we're Christians, is the first motivating factor. God, but love. I think we don't need everybody to come out and be in that all together, and we don't necessarily need this like 100% of us to be involved and in that or to agree, but we do need 3 to 3.5% of a population to push an issue, and that means more than we have now. So that's the tricky thing, because there is friction and conflict involved in that. Yeah, it's complex navigating that together.
Mention of protesting to the banks, and my only response was, we wish. We've had 5 banks in Bramwell that all closed in the last 12 months.
Yes. Yes, you'd like a bank to protest at. Yes, I appreciate that sentiment. Yes, those structures are not necessarily there.
Yeah, we just wondered about the 3.5%, Kate, where that number comes from, and how is that 3.5% made up? Is it I think the term Richard used was movers and shakers. Do need to be part of it, or is it 3.5% of the general population? How's that made up?
Yeah, it's 3.5% of the general population active and willing to be involved in non-violent civil resistance. Yeah. So it's not 3.5% of this group, the little, but of the total population. Yeah. And so, for example, the first lot of people, it was very, very controversial. First lot of people for the M20 who were on the M25 with Insulate Britain, I think there were 9. And then as soon as they were arrested and taken away, then another batch of people came, unplanned, uninvited. They came randomly, from a variety of places in the country. And then when they were taken off, a number of other people came, and then a number of other people. So in the end, it was about 200 people. But it started with 9 people. Jesus started with 12. We've got a really good history of this. We have a worldwide movement. So the 3.5%, I think, it's not idealism. It's thoroughly researched, strategic work about what changes something. So in apartheid, what changes in fair trade? What changes in order to get something of justice into the structure and the body and the institutions so it becomes normal and good order and everyday life for everybody. And writing to my MP, as much as I will continue to do that, for me it's both and. But for some people, they've done that. And it hasn't affected the change that's needed. And they are at desperation point. And that's part of their motivation is, what else can we do? I wish we had other options, but we've got 2 to 6 years. So it's this challenge. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah,
thanks very much, Kate. We have been quite disciplined in time with the other sessions, so I'll draw this one to a close here. First of all, I'd like to just ask us to offer our thanks to Kate for coming and challenging us and presenting a way of responding to this emergency. And I think encouraging us all to share in that if we want to, but particularly to tolerate and support it, even if we don't think it's the right thing for us. But thank you very much for the talk. That was great.
Some bits, if anybody wants to follow up.
Some bits. There's a lot of stuff on the Christian Climate Action website, and it's one of the websites that's really quite easy to navigate around, so I'd recommend you going to that if you'd like to. I'm going to finish off with a blessing. We could get that up. Oh, sorry, no, I'm not. Previous slide. I want to give a plug for next week. We're meeting on Tuesday, so that's just 5 sleeps away, so it's coming quite quickly, okay? Niall is the founding director of Church Action on Poverty, one of the leading figures in the country on issues of poverty. He's going to bring along one of his trustees, who is someone who has lived in poverty and is going to speak from experience about the experiences she's had, and he's going to lead us in some discussions about more about how we can have joint action. I think today has been primarily about how we can act ourselves. And he's going to talk more about how the church can get together to have influence as a body. So I'd really advocate coming along and listening to Neil. So please come along, bring a friend if you can. So now let's move on to the final slide. So this is a blessing that's been written by the ACT Alliance. The ACT Alliance is a group of aid charities, including Christian Aid, Tear Fund, CAFOD, all the usual subjects, I suppose you could say. And this is a little blessing they've written for the climate emergency. So if you could join with the bold type. May God bless us with wonder at creation's glory. May God bless us with fury at creation's spoiling. May God bless us with courage at this critical hour. And may the blessing of God, Creator, Son, and Holy Spirit, rest upon us and on all creation, this day and for the future to come. Amen. If you online would like to remain in breakout rooms, you can carry on the conversation, and we'll have a cup of coffee here and have a little chat with each other.